Welcome to the Dungeon Special of the LitRPG Audiobook Podcast. I am your host, Ray, and I will be reviewing some Dungeon LitRPG books for you today. They may be new, they may be classics, but everyone will be unforgettable.
Well, welcome back, gang. I hope this is a bit of a surprise. I figured, with the Halloween season upon us, I should do a special about somebody's favorite style of writing. Mine. And that would be the dungeon genre of LitRPG. Today, I'm adding this special this week, just for your enjoyment. And I will be talking about several different dungeon books. But first, before we do that, I'm going to show you how to grow your own dungeon. Now, the first thing you need to do is get yourself a dungeon core, a soul gem, something like this, that houses just the spirit of some small little animal. It doesn't have to be human. But it helps. Oh, how it helps. So, you take your dungeon core, and then you call forth your potting soil. Yes, the potting soil. Come to me, soil. Thank you. Then, you place your dungeon core into the pot. And you sprinkle the earth inside around. Then, you take your special dungeon tool. Thank you. This is something you have to be very delicate with. And you just mull the soil around slowly so that it gets in there. Then you pack it down very gently. There is a soul inside there, you know. You tamp it down. Take this away, please, dungeon spirits. Thank you. Then you concentrate on the style of the dungeon you want. For myself,
I will be asking for a necrotic dungeon. I love the undead. Okay, dungeon, take this away, please. Off with you. We will be getting that back later. But for now we do the dungeon reviews.
next, we have Dungeonborn by Dakota Kraut, narrated by Vicus Adams. This is in the Divine Dungeon series, and it has a book length of 12 hours and 32 minutes.
I got here. Something was happening. Something odd? Not bad, I don't think, but certainly odd. I was at the bottom of the small puddle in my rock, and whereas previously I could only see in a direct line of sight around me, I could now see everything where the water had overflowed to. Neat! More than see, actually. I could sense everything in that area perfectly, as if all of my senses were attuned to the space around me. I tasted the salty stone, smelled the earthy fragrance, saw every flaw and nuance of the stone, and heard echoes of falling water. The perception only went as far as the water had drained, so it wasn't true sight or hearing but really it was better. More fulfilling and satisfying somehow. For some reason, I also really began to understand the rock I was on. After all, now I knew the word stalagmite.
Now, When I first heard of Dungeonborn, I was a bit skeptical. I'd never read any dungeon books at all, and the entire concept reminded me of an old video game that I played called Dungeon Keeper. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but it was a fantastic game in which you played and controlled a dungeon and fought off invading heroes. So my skepticism dwindled when I remembered just how much fun I'd had with that game. How I loved the concept and thought, man, if it's only half as fun as the game, then the writer's a genius for even pulling this off at all. So I gave it a shot. And I'm so glad that I did. I loved the way this book started. I mean, who doesn't like a good bloody sacrifice? I appreciated the way that Cal slowly came into his awareness. And I felt like it felt like a good seed that had been planted and was growing slowly into awareness. And it was fascinating to watch it grow. And then Danny, the dungeon wisp, appeared, and I was totally hooked. Between the two of them, I had no chance of getting away without being addicted. Danny is probably one of the best supporting cast members out there, and I could listen to her say, "Cal!" all day long. I'll never do it as good as Adams, but I mean, it's great. Her fits of exasperation are hilarious, and the bond they share is tender and precious. It is quite possibly the best pure and chaste romance I have ever seen written. Though platonic, their love for each other is so clear it's outstanding. And I'm not a mushy, hugsy kind of guy, but still, I can respect the emotions. So, he really knows how to write, non-physical, emotional romance. It stands out. It really does. It really touched me. I also enjoy Dale, and that's not just because that's my middle name. He's actually a pretty cool guy. He's a thinker. He's not afraid of hard work. He constantly strives to better himself. Oh, and his best companion is Hans. And Hans reminds me a lot of my friend Miller, who interacts in War Eternus. Not in the way of speaking. He's not Miller in that aspect, although his voice is totally fine. But the way he has his back and his personality shines so much stronger than the other dungeon divers. Miller stands out in War Eternus because of his personality. Same with Hans. Hans just has something about him that makes you just connect immediately. But I digress. I haven't told you what this is about. The story is about an unknown man who was sacrificed during a ritual that is intended to make a very naughty dungeon core. His soul is ripped from his body and embedded within the core, and the core is then lost in battle. The core itself slowly becomes sapient and expands and grows. And it's during the growth stage that Danny the Wisp appears. The two bond and set off creating a dungeon that is both deadly but fair in the way that it does business. Now, like I said, the interaction between Cal and Danny and Cal's desperate attempt to get Dale are some of the funniest bits I've seen in a long time. Dale, battling expansion on his land, struggling against guilds, and trying to clean his system, his bodily system, of corruption is just as fun and fascinating as watching Cal grow. The creatures that Cal creates are original and show that Kraut has a real appreciation for Monty Python movies, unless I miss my guess. The book is filled with action, and there are plenty of fights and deaths by traps to satisfy the most outstanding bloodlust our listeners could ask for, as well as having a bit of a mystery. I mean, who was Cal? Who killed him? Why did they do it? I don't know. Well, I do because I've read the other books, but I've had my suspicion at the beginning, and I was pretty close, but I wasn't right. I'll be the first one to admit that I didn't get the mystery solved. But the mystery here just kind of blooms. And also, there appears to be an adversary hiding off in the shadows that wants the worst for Cal, and he keeps trying to kill Dale too. The story is humorous, but simultaneously very serious in the events that take place. And I really rooted for the dungeon to eat everybody and cheered every time he leveled up. It was pretty much the same thing with Dale. I was happy to see him get better and improve as the book went on. Now, this was the first time I'd heard Vicus Adams. Remember, I had just gotten into LitRPG here and was just getting done listening to Jeff Hayes. And I really thought these LitRPG guys knew how to narrate. I mean, they were so good. And if you listen to me at all, you know I love Hayes. The man is a master. But I'm going to say that Vicus Adams is right within spitting distance of him. Now, oddly, I think the next book that I read after this was Reboot by Domino Finn, which means I was also introduced to Justin Thomas James. And I really have to wonder if these guys didn't influence my taste in literature. If it hadn't been for them, I would not have fallen into LitRPG the way that I did. Either way, I know that James Marsters is famous for doing his Dresden Files readings, but I will forever say that, as good as Marsters is, Hayes has his field locked down, and Adams owns the dungeon genre. Okay? No one will come in and take over the subgenre of dungeons from Adams. It's just not possible. And he owns it. I mean, at least he has a really big mansion there, okay? Like I said, his characterizations of Cal and Danny, oh God, especially Danny, and Hans are simply amazing. So for male voices, I have to say, in no particular order, the best male voices I've heard in this genre are Hayes, Adams, Thomas, and I'll even say, they're up there with Morgan Freeman. But I only say that because Morgan Freeman narrated, the voice of he was the voice of the Shawshank Redemption. I'm not even going to talk about that Penguin movie, because no one cares about penguins unless they go to jail and then things get stabby. Then they'll care. They'll care. I'm digressing again, aren't I? I'm going to have to subtitle this show, but I digress. Either way, Adams is totally outstanding, and I loved listening to him. You will too. I mean, he really, really elevates this book to such a degree that it's scary. Because I know if I didn't have those voices, as much as Kraut's writing is fantastic, I mean, please, Creationist Chronicles, it just would not have been as attention-grabbing as this was with Adams doing the narration. This is the book that started me off on the whole dungeon genre, and I'm so glad that it did. Because it really showed me exactly how things should go. The companion, the leveling, the building, the monsters. It's wonderfully handled, and Kraut's only improved with each book he's done since. I mean, seriously, check out the Completionist Chronicles. Get book 2 and 3 of the Dungeon Born series. You can't go wrong. The Divine Dungeon series is just amazing, amazing. And book 3, he's left it hanging far too long. I know he's going off into this Completionist Chronicles stuff. I love the Completionist Chronicles. But I need my dungeon fix, okay? Kraut's got to come back to this. Now, I hate to even give this book a rating, because it'll either be way too high, it'll be crazy high, or it'll be just, it won't be high enough, it'll be too low. So, I mean, out of 10 star, I mean, how do I do this? I just can't be fair about it. It's so close to perfection. I'm going to say 8.5. 8.5 just because. I don't know where else to say or where else to go with it. That's as fair as I can be. For me, a 9's perfection. If you go past the 9, there's been some divine power coming in. So 8.5 is darn good, and it's well deserved. The next book I'm reading a review for will be The Slime Dungeon by Jeffrey Falcon Logue, narrated by Ryan Turner in the Slime Dungeon series chronicles. And it is 6 hours and 12 minutes.
With this body, I think I'll say her name, since I managed to hold on to it. It has a poetic feel to it. The first word should be the same as the last word. Hannah. Chapter 1. I managed to fall asleep in my new body. Being reborn, I guess, was an exhausting experience. I remembered nothing of emotional significance besides the 2 images, and I lost a lot of factual information as well. To put it in more simple terms, I was a nearly blank slate. Falling asleep in the new body was a lot different from what I could remember from my previous one. I had nothing to move and no eyes to close. However, I felt my light die down as my consciousness faded away. My brightness was an indicator of my alertness, I think. When I woke up, I found I could actively control the amount of light I gave off, and thus my level of alertness.
Now, this book came out shortly after Dungeonborn, by about 5 months, and it actually bears a lot of similarities to the novel by Dakota Kraut. For example, the companion is a dungeon pixie, and the dungeon is unique in his own way. Doc the Dungeon has no recall of who he was, only that he must save her. So as in Cal, he can't really remember much of anything other than he hates necromancers, and he has a companion who just happens to be a wisp named Danny. Past that point, the dungeon growing and such, that's about it between the two of them. Doc is really not interested in how things are normally done by dungeons. He likes to follow the unbeaten path and goes in for using slimes as the vessels of his destructions. Now, I am a huge, very much big fanboy of slimes and that sort of thing. Blobs are my thing. I've loved them since I first read a book called Alfred Hitchcock's anthology, Monster Museum, which held a short story called Slime by Joseph Payne Brennan. And it predated one of my favorite movies, The Blob, by about 5 or so years. There's also a movie called Creepshow 2, which you may have seen, with a piece called The Raft, and the movie Phantoms as well. That's an amazing slime, blobby kind of thing. There were also movies that came out in the 50s, just pre-60s, I think, like Kaltiki the Immortal Monster and the H-Man, that made me love the gelatinous monsters even more. Heck, when I played D&D, my favorite monsters were what? The gelatinous cubes and the green slime and the various puddings. Man, I wish I had some pudding. I would be eating it right now. I'm so hungry. So I think you can see that my attraction to a dungeon filled with voracious slimes was inevitable. Yes, inevitable. Doc, however, has to be a kind of a fair lair of death. He does his best only to kill when it's absolutely necessary. He feeds himself in other ways, and while the dungeon is the main character, there is a story in which a royal person is plotted against and targeted for murder. The dungeon intervenes, as he recalls he must save her, whoever that is, and he kind of goofs up the nefarious plot. This leads to a mess of events happening, which slowly reveals the big bad of the book itself. Excuse me. The writing is pretty good, but it does feel almost episodic, like each chapter was written in and of itself. And it isn't bad, but it doesn't flow quite as well as it could have. And while Doc and Claire have a really nice relationship, it does feel a little weird, like almost two kids who want to play doctor but never quite get there. And part of the episodic feel stems from the way the character is introduced, too. It's sort of like, let's just say, for example, Bob the Paladin comes in, and then you get a description like, he was from the Bo-Shan province, and he was so good-looking people called him the Face of Bo. He worshipped the sun god Dial, and had 6 brothers and sisters. That isn't bad, but it gives you an idea of how you weren't given a chance to have them develop or get some depth. It allows us to find out about them naturally. It's not bad, but it does detract a little bit of the fun of discovering a character on our own. And that's about it for flaws. It isn't perfect, but there are a lot of good things. The relationship between Claire and Doc, Doc's desire to be a good dungeon and not kill people, the way he takes in the wolf cubs and he grows his slimes. The villain is even cool, and he's properly evil. And that's something you don't really get most times. Although I could have done without the red eyes being a giveaway for his evilness. The book is fun and sets up a good bit for the next to flow a little bit easier now that the world building is out of the way. Now, in the spirit of honesty, I have only recently listened to this book. I only got this book so that I could review it for this special. The reason I held off for so long was that I had to listen to the audio snippet before, the one that Audible provides, and I was a little leery about the narration by Ryan Turner. It just didn't grab me. But I said, hey, here's an author I'm not giving a chance to because of my impression of a 5-minute clip. And that's not exactly fair, so I gave it a try. Now, Turner is a fair narrator. He does quite well on most of the voices, and he carries the story along pretty well, but he does stumble just a little bit on the females. It was hard to discern which lady he was speaking for sometimes, and none of them ever really stood out to me like, say, Vicus Adams' Danny, the Wisp, or Jeff Hayes, the one, Jade from War Eternus, for example. I would say that he did a more than competent job. I just wasn't overwhelmed with his ladies in the book. When he does straight reading, he's fine. I did enjoy the book, and have subsequently gotten the other books in the series, so that I know I liked it. I don't know what happens later on, but Book 1 provides a lot of setup for what looks to be a fun, lighthearted series. I would almost say that this has the potential to be a great family book or a young adult series as well, and I'm not trying to say that in a negative way. I'm not trying to say it's dumbed down for anybody. It's not, but it could have been a great, young adult or, family book, but there's a potential rape scene, and that kind of puts it right out of those categories for me. I can let my kids listen to a guy get dissolved by a hostile slime, but yes, I do balk at them hearing about someone talking about rape, so my priorities may be just a wee bit skewed. Either way, aside from just a few minor issues, I have to give this an 8.1 stars. My biggest problem was with the narration more than the story, and that's where I kind of shave a little bit off. It would have been a little bit higher, but the ladies' voices just didn't cut it. The dungeon building and the slime evolution were some of the best bits. I really loved the way that the slimes did progress and get more powerful and weirder as time went on, and that was a bonus for me. And I also liked the way that they killed their foes. I could have done a little bit without, the dungeon saying, I hate killing people, but then when somebody dies going, hey, I feel good. If he's going to feel bad about it, he should feel bad about it, even if he gets powered up. But past that, like I say, it's all good. It's Saul Goodman. It's Saul Goodman. It's a good story. It's a fairly decent setup for the next book in the series. I think that if he continues right from where he left off at or picks up a little bit later, the story's going to flow just fine. So I anticipate seeing what comes next. Thank you, Jeffrey. Well, I just got back from visiting Jeffrey Falcon Logue's Slime Dungeon, and I managed to acquire a very, very important specimen. Thank you, Dungeon Spirits. As you can see, this slime has the capability of killing 100 men in less than 10 minutes if properly introduced. But I can stop this slime with a simple metallic tool. Thank you, Dungeon. The Dungeon Spirits are kind. They have given me my special metallic tool. So, I will now diffuse the possibility of this slime doing anything dangerous to me in this dungeon of mine. Oh, he's so good. I must say, Mr. Logue knows how to cook up his slimes. Ah, so good. So good. I'm just going to put him away for later and let him grow back. He's too good not to eat. Over and over again. Now, I would like to begin my next review on a book called Monster Spawn.
It's time for you to enter Adonis. She turned her back to him. A door appeared in front of her. As she walked toward it, Nathan called out, "Wait, you're supposed to tell me how I died." She looked at the touchpad again and shook her head. "It's time to forget your old life and focus on your new one. This is your rebirth." Guy's death is pretty personal to him, kinda hard to forget. "I'm sorry, Nathan. There are rules." He had a burning need to see it. It was like it was the most important thing in the world. When people had accidents and woke up in the hospital, their first question was always, "What happened?" This was no minor accident. He was dead, and there had to be a way to show it to him. Wait, our combat helmets, they have cameras. Surely it recorded what happened. She held up the touchpad. "I'm sorry, Nathan. Truly I am. Your results indicate that you won't be able to handle seeing your death. The circumstances are too graphic."
Dungeon, what are you doing? Dungeon. Quit yanking my chain. The spirits of this dungeon always give me problems. Always. It drives me crazy. So back onto the review. The review is for Monster Spawn. What? Monster Spawn? By Deck Davis? What? Narrated by David Loving. It's only 4 hours and 40 minutes long. And I'm reviewing it? Are you kidding me? What? Who gave me this book? Alright. I know. I said I would not be doing Deck Davis reviews for a while. I had been pretty hard on a couple of reviews of his, and I didn't want to go around beating the poor guy up. Okay? Because, hey, this stuff is just my opinion, and I don't want to hurt anybody. But I talked with Ramon, and he said that this is my job to review. And so long as I'm open, honest, and fair, that it was up to me to do what I do, and he was right. So I have to admit, I headed into this book with some serious trepidation, and not trepanation, which honestly is what I thought I would need to get me to return to this again. Ready for this? I actually enjoyed the book a little bit. It wasn't that bad. A lot of the stuff that put me off in his other tales were noticeably absent here. While the MC is a monster, he isn't a total D-bag. He isn't a smart mouth or a punk, and that actually plays well for Davis. I can't handle his crude characters and humor, but here the humor wasn't bad. I mean, it wasn't great. I didn't laugh at it, but it was tamer, and it was toned down, and it worked much better in the context that it had, rather than this guy being a total jerk and using potty humor the entire time, or sexual innuendo, or just plain vulgarity. It was refreshing to see him actually do some straightforward writing rather than let his inner teenager take the wheel. The story centers on a guy named Nathan who has died, and like in Reboot, has been uploaded into the game Adonis Rebirth. The problem is he's downloaded as a monster and not a player. A lot of the book deals with him coming to grips with the fact and accepting it. And it isn't until sometime into the midway point that he actively acts like a dungeon master by setting traps and creating minions. But one thing I will say is the premise showed a lot of potential with where this could have gone, and the ending kind of threw me a little bit. Davis tosses a huge curveball, and I don't know why it was thrown, since this seemed to be a football game up to that point. I thought that the mechanics of the game that he was in were unique, but the end seemed to toss everything that we knew right out the window. Plus, there were a lot of things that just made no sense at all. The end confrontation with the big bad was really just poorly executed. The plan had more holes in it than a fishing net and held as much water as well as a colander does. Like I say, the writing was improved, but there were a lot of little things that bogged the story down. I think that my favorite aspect was the whole sanity thing, in which he goes more and more insane the more he becomes more monstrous. So the more monstery things he does, the crazier he gets. That was an excellent game mechanic, and it played right into my Call of Cthulhu sympathies. David Loving's narration is purely middle of the road, but that doesn't detract from the story. In fact, I completely believe that it meshed well with Davis's writing. By no means was I blown away by his vocal skills or his reading capability. To me, he seemed more like a novice high school kid trying out for the senior play, but one who knows how to read his lines really well without fumbling. He was clear, but his emphasis and his emotional delivery could have used some work. But he didn't kill the story. It was not a J.J. Jeunesse review all over again. He kind of dragged it along at a fair pace and managed to keep things running. So, plot holes, weird ending direction, and mediocre narration actually made this better than his other audiobooks I've reviewed so far. It was a surprising step up, and I kind of like it. He's trying to be more adult in his writing. I'm looking forward to the sequel to this book just because it's such a departure from what he's done before. And I did enjoy it. I mean, it was not a fantastically amazing book. It didn't blow me away, but it did keep me interested. In spite of the weird direction it took, I could still see a lot of potential here. I think there was a lot of wasted potential. I think that there were a lot of things he could have done that he didn't do. I think that there was some silliness that was involved with like the three ancients in the dungeon that really didn't need to be there. I'm not a big fan of go solve a riddle in order to do things. I think there needs to be some more action to things, especially in this book, because he's a monster and he really, really doesn't do much killing until really close to the end. In fact, one of the big issues I took umbrage with was the end of the book basically was him trying to fool somebody, and while he had an opportunity to strike, he took like 45 seconds to do a Hamlet soliloquy in his head. You know, it was just really bizarre how that happened. When he should have been striking, he was considering. So it didn't work all that well as far as I was concerned. It was just kind of, what were you thinking when you wrote that? I don't know. But that's spoilers, so I digress. And I did say that I liked it. It pretty much meant that I didn't hate this book. The story had a better semblance of what it takes to make a story, but the plans and attacks were not well executed. The MC was a little dense and a little clumsy. Seriously, I've never seen anybody trip or stub their toe or bash their head or fall as often as this guy. And he was a military guy. One thing I will say, and I'm going to just kind of go into it, the man is killed in action, and he dies a hero, but they won't tell him why he died or what killed him or what happened. And yet, the way this thing works is that they upload a copy of you before you go out into the field. Okay, they do a little scan, and zoop, then you go out and you fight. So if you get killed out there, right before you go into battle, there's a copy of you. Okay, somehow, somewhere, his memories of the death that he has felt come to light. They come full bore. There's no way that would have been possible if the game mechanics that they told you about were real. Okay, because he was just dead, and there was no recording of his brain pattern for that to be there in his mind. It just kind of felt weird to me, and it did not strike the nerves that I felt it needed to strike. It was just out of place because it wasn't realistic. It wasn't plausible. So, that was an issue that I had more than anything. Like I say, the end curveball, it's a weird direction that he goes in, for a dungeon monster. But I think that he could do something with it in the future. There's potential there. Like I say, there's a lot of wasted potential to this book. It's got really good story possibilities, and they just kind of get flip-flopped for other things. But I think Davis really tried hard in this book. I think he did a pretty good job improving. I think his style is getting better. And if he can stay writing like this, I'll be happy to look at his next book. I will look at it and say, okay, I just think he needs a narrator who can handle his material, and he needs to stay away from the vulgarities and the potty humor and the sexual innuendos, because as much as he thinks it's funny, he's not good at it. Here, while the jokes fell flat for me, they still were okay. There's somebody out there, I'm sure, who would have laughed, especially the ETH thing. I don't think that it played off as well because of the narrator, but either way, it was a much better improvement over that than the fart jokes and the butt jokes and the D jokes and all that. So final score is 6.5. I'm so happy to see him coming up and getting better and improving and doing so much more than what he was before. He's actually doing what he's capable of. And that makes me really happy. So congratulations, Deck. I will keep on the lookout for your next stuff. Thank you. The next book that we'll be doing is Dungeon Lord, The Wraith's Haunt by Hugo Huesca, narrated by Jeff Hayes and Annie Ellicott. The book's length is 9 hours and 37 minutes.
Well. The prey saves us the trouble of hunting for it and even brings my children a worthy feast. Tell me, O'Meal, which one is the dungeon lord that hides among you? The smell of Sapphire's bane has marred the entire forest for weeks, but you're carrying it with you.
The sight of the Spider Queen and her overwhelming forces had as much an effect on the seasoned adventurers as she had on Kleck. Kess turned to Ione and told him,
"You said she would never attack with her entire cluster."
The ranger ignored her. He was drawing another arrow while chanting 2 quick words that added a red, pulsating energy to the shaft.
"She shouldn't,"
Alvidra answered the elf without drawing her gaze away from the spiders.
"This is not how they hunt."
Ed resisted the desire to scream at them. To base their entire battle plan on a she shouldn't was idiocy.
This is a very visceral book that will simply hit you on numerous emotional plateaus. At first glance, it's nothing more than your standard LitRPG Portal/Dungeon book, which is nice because it kind of pops 3 cherries at once for a new reader. So you've got that going for you. And I think the only thing that Hugo really missed was the potential for a harem aspect, but I think he wisely stayed away from that. The protagonist, Edward, is pretty simple cat who is dominated by his boss both in and outside of work. His only relief from the doldrums of life comes from playing an MMORPG with his co-workers once their shift ends. Now, the jerk of a boss finds out that the co-workers play together and insinuates himself into their game. Worse yet, not only is he a major jerk, he's also a horrible player. What's worse, that he's a jerk or he's a horrible player? Well, I would take the boss part and say that's probably worse because you can always quit working and then drop him from the team. But anyway, The boss repeatedly goofs up their gameplay and then shunts the blame toward the other players. Edward is then put into a really tough position by his boss, who wants him to fire one of his gaming pals, a lady friend, for not playing that well the night before. Edward considers the order and then decides life would be just that much better if he were to punch out the guy and quit, which he promptly does, so props for Edward for sticking by his convictions. Moments after walking out of the door, he is contacted by an entity that is not of this world. I mean, honestly, when you hear the word entity, you know it's got to be from outside of this world, right? You know, you don't talk about entities that come from the sewers or from down the street. They're from somewhere else, really. The world in which he played in all the time, in fact. And he learns that he has an offer to replace the dungeon lord that he and his team had killed the night before. It seems that the game world that Edward and the others have been playing in is really real, and that the game that they play actually affects that world. And the evil that's making this offer to him wants to overtake it. An evil god named Murmur needs agents, such as dungeon lords, to do their dirty work and corrupt the land and souls. So Edward makes a pact, but he swears he will never do Murmur's bidding. He will use the power given to him to be good and to be his own person. He will be beholden to no one. Now, this is a good start, and the book moves swiftly into the intro. It doesn't take a third of the book to get into the action. Really, I mean, it's just a few, pages, and you're right to the new world. How does this fit into the dungeon genre, you ask? Well, Lord Wraith, that's Edward to you mugs, is not a soul trapped inside of a dungeon core, but it is his job to build a dungeon, stalk it with mobs, and kill players that enter his domain. So no, he's not a dungeon core, but he is the life of the dungeon that he takes over, and that qualifies this as being a genuine dungeon book. I appreciate that Huesca could change up the format enough that it's identifiable as a dungeon book, but make it so that the MC is not landlocked into one position. I do believe that Edward could flee if he needed to, but he would have to completely restart from scratch if he did so. In and of itself, the story is lighthearted for the most part, but then it adds in a new element, horror. And I mean, it comes out of the blue. I can't say just how good it worked on the written page, but the audio certainly adds a massive creep factor, and it is legitimately disturbing. But I'll get to that in a minute or so. Back to the funnier light aspects, I think that one of the best scenes in the book comes when Edward realizes that he is living and fighting in a real video game, and then complains that he doesn't get enough XP for killing a tough mob. The underlings that he gathers after he enters the world all have great personalities and could easily steal the show, but Edward's presence is strong enough that he manages to dominate the page, or rather the spoken images of the narrators, I should put. While the story bounces between drama, comedy, and action, there comes a point when the element of horror is introduced without warning, and damn if it doesn't work. Again, I'm going to say that this most likely works better in an audio format because your imagination will never compare to the distraught cries that the narration brings to the written page. I can tell you straight up, I am very inured to horrifying things. I'm a funeral director. I've seen everything. I've heard everything. I've been in the trenches, believe me. I have watched creature features in horror movies since I was 2 or 3 years old. Nothing phases me. Nothing bothers me. Nothing makes me jump or flinch. Annie Ellicott's narration made my stomach turn and literally disturbed me as I listened. I don't say this lightly either. She stole this book with her cameo. Jeff Hayes is as rock steady and impactful as he always is. And on any other day, for my sound booth shout out, I would say that he owned this book, body and soul. But he plays Edward and all the other characters perfection, and even has some fun with Charon too. But Annie takes this monster and makes it heartbreaking and terrifying all at the same time. And it's even more impressive to know that she's a newbie. This is her first book, I do believe. If I'm wrong on that, forgive me. But I don't think she's had done any narration up until this point. Nothing that was put out anyway. So, you actually sympathize with the creature. And as a newcomer to the narration industry, I have to applaud her. She killed this piece. Once more, I reiterate, Sound Booth was flawless in their audio production. Hayes is the man of 1,001 voices, and he serves up some of his best work. The sound quality is pitch perfect, with nary a hitch in the giddy-up, and the storytelling by the dynamic duo of the Disquisition. That's right, dynamic duo of Disquisition. Look it up, peasants. Sorry, that was just me being in character with the whole dungeon thing. You're not peasants. I love you guys. But the dynamic duo of Disquisition is unbelievable. Overall, this is a fantastic first book in what promises to be a long line of novels. The writing is top-notch, the plot is perfection, the pace is pulsing, and the narration makes this more of an adventure than you would expect, but it also rips out your heart and sends shivers up your spine. Oh, does it send shivers up your spine? Personally, I really look forward to more of this series, the writing, and the narrators. It's all top quality, and undoubtedly you will love this novel. I see it easily. If this was on Audible, I would say it's 5 stars across the board. But here, I'm going to say this is like an 8.6. Okay? 8.6 because Annie Ellicott's infusion of horror out of nowhere takes this to a whole new level. It's scary, horrifying, and it rips your heart out because it's so sad. That's all I can say about this. You don't want to miss this book. This series is just fantastic. Get in while the getting's good and go visit this dungeon. Next up, we have The Rogue Dungeon by James Hunter and Eden Hudson. Narrated by Nick Podell, with a book length of 7 hours and 41 minutes.
Kaz appeared in the doorway at the end of the hall. When he saw Rorik coming, his eyes opened wide and he started shaking his head.
No, Master, there's...
Rorik blew past Kaz into the room.
No way out.
Kaz finished with a gulp. The room was barely larger than a cell, and Kaz was right. It was a dead end. Rorik searched the walls, floor, and ceiling frantically, but found only unyielding stone. Nothing to hide behind. The Rog slammed to a stop outside the door, grabbing the elf before he barreled inside.
Wait, do you think there's some kind of trap? She asked. On level 1 of, like, the noobiest dungeon on the northern coast?
The elf scoffed.
I mean, have you ever seen mobs run like that before? There's gotta be something special about them. Nah, look at them, Kel. No elites, nothing. But that one's got a weapon, the Rog insisted. When have you ever seen a changeling with a weapon?
I am going to come clean here. I am unquestionably a huge fan of James Hunter. Everything that he's written, from his urban fantasy Yancey Lazarus, to his LitRPG series Viridian Gate Online, to that grocery list that he dropped in the store, which, as you can see, is brilliant. It is pure magic. He has milk, bread, eggs, a +2 Vorpal sword, and healing potions. Prop guy, we've got to update our healing potions staff. Get some stock in here. This is ridiculous. I haven't even thought about getting that at the store. And eggs. That makes me think we need eggs too. Alright. So, he dropped that the other day while he was shopping, by the way. I must also say that you might further consider me to be biased, because I do have a story coming up in the upcoming Viridian Gate anthology novel, Side Quest. But that does not make anything I am about to say untrue or inaccurate. This book is genuinely brilliant. That much like The Land of the Undying by Dave Wilmarth, it is just as interesting in its real world as it is in its game world. The real world is actually a fantasy realm in which the hero Rorik is a rebel. He fights against an evil usurper who has used his ability to control magics, unlike every mage before him, to steal his empire. The setting seems to be slightly German in tone, with an interesting magic system in which the written word conveys power. When his attack on the tyrant fails, he tries to escape through a portal, which is a very dicey proposition at best for him, and he finds himself not where he wanted or expected to be, but in a strange world, with new magics and an unlimited lifespan that allows him to respawn. What he doesn't realize is that he's entered Hearthworld, which is actually an MMORPG. What he doesn't realize is he has no clue that he's in a video game at all, and he simply treats it like he's entered another world, which is a logical conclusion for him to reach. And that, my friends, is the brilliance of this story. Rorik is an interesting protagonist, and oddly, the real antagonist is a player named Poner Boner 007. And that is a game name that will stand beside the most legendary of all game names, Leroy Jenkins! That's right. There's Leroy Jenkins, and then there's Poner Boner 007. Now, that isn't to say that the Tyrant Lord doesn't loom in the background and play in Rorik's mind constantly. But honestly, he really goes at Poner Boner 007 enough that he qualifies as the main antagonist of this story. And that is another strength of this book. It goes from serious to silly, and no matter the tone, Rorik plays it straight. Truly, this book was far too short. I loved every second of it. And I really think that this is quite possibly one of the best series he's done to date. It stands right beside VGO. Don't think that I am discounting Eden Hudson either. She is an incredible writer, and her novel, Two-Faced, is about as top-notch as they come. She has some serious chops. I mean, like Mr. Miyagi chops. I know that I said I respected how well James was able to co-write with Aaron Crash because it seemed like it was a single voice. And the same is true here. The only thing is the voice is utterly different in tone from Morgod or from Viridian Gate. And that is a masterful piece of combining writing styles, visions, and attitudes. The book blew me away at every turn. The only drawback again was that it was too short. Now, you might be calling me out on how does this fit into the dungeon category for this special. And I'm going to tell you now that it's because Rorik literally becomes a part of the dungeon. He grows in power and manages to lead a section of the dungeon all by himself. And I can see him eventually taking over the dungeon in its entirety at some point in the future. He may not have started out with a soul gem or a dungeon core or something else to give him powers over the dungeon, but he became ingrained and ingratiated with it. And that qualifies. That qualifies. The narration by Nick Podell is outstanding. He transitions Rorik's voice slowly as he gains levels, and it is subtle, but so realistic that you have to pay attention. And he also plays the monster so well, and embodies the snark of Poner Boner 007. His other characters, from the orcish, or not orcish, but troll assassin, or the troll warrior, who you can see in the great big body behind Rorik in the cover, is toned out to be just about as doofus as you can be and still be a scary monster. He pulls it off, though. He really does. You think the guy's stupid, but no, he's smart enough to survive. And that's the trick that he manages to do. Overall, this book has been one heck of a ride. I have enjoyed every moment of it. And again, I am not going to apologize for enjoying it. I think anybody who reads this will see how good a book it actually is. It's impressive from start to finish. I'm giving it an 8.5 because it is that powerful. It is just that powerful a book. And you will find it to be as impressive as I. Get it and enjoy it. And then find his other titles, Yancey Lazarus, Viridian Gate Online, and the War God Mantle. Those books are just as good. This is very promising for a new book. 8.5 stars. Don't let it get away from you. Away! Yes, like you could escape the dungeon. Now, the next book I'm doing is Dungeon Deposed by William D. Rand, narrated by the wonderful, amazing Andrea Parsnow. There you go, Andrea. And the book length is 13 hours and 19 minutes.
Thoughts sprang from the void. They filled the crystal with consciousness. Where am I? What's going on? Said the crystal. I was just... The voice was cut off as Riker cut the soul free of the crystal it was housed in. It floated off immediately and vanished, heading toward wherever it was spirits went.
Finally. Sorry about that, friend. Let's both hope your next incarnation goes better,
he said with a smirk. Rolling the dungeon core around in his hand, he could still feel the life there.
Well, if not better, maybe at least last longer than it takes me to eat breakfast.
Setting the core down on the table, Riker lifted the heel of bread to his mouth and ripped a strip off of it.
That takes care of that. A working dungeon core I can use. Now, we need to figure out how to get the core to...
Now, in case you can't tell, I really enjoy dungeon books. I never thought that I would. But they are an amazing concept, and I really admire versatility. And the writing that allows so many variations of what it means to be a dungeon. For example, Dakota Kraut's Divine Dungeon is a literal core that builds upon a structure around itself. Hugo Heska's Dungeon Lord is about a man who is tied to his dungeon and can only build up in one area. And Rand here has created a character who literally steals a dungeon core for himself and is able to create and add to his dungeon on a whim. That concept alone, as fun as it is and as different as it is to see a man who is basically super talented but lacks the capacity to adventure to use his wits, to become a success and get revenge rather than his arm or his magic. Because, I'm sorry, but he's known as One Shot because he's good for one spell, and that's that. Well, actually it's One Pump, as he's affectionately known by his peers. But he's a highly skilled mage, but he only has the stamina to just cast about truly 3 spells before he's exhausted to the point of invalidity. His schemes to get his revenge on those who have mistreated him is to steal a dungeon core and then set about laying plans to get his revenge by drawing them in and killing everyone who he holds in low regard, one at a time. Now, there is some typical stuff, like the Dungeon Wisp Fairy and the act of a town building up around a dungeon, but it's really a fresh concept that plays out well. Riker is a likable fellow, even though he's a little petty when it comes to the getting of his revenge. Andrea Parsnow does do an amazing job narrating. She really nails the majority of the characters, but I will say her version of Riker makes him sound a little snivelly. This is what he kind of comes across like. So he's not a guy I would say is heroic or admirable by the way he speaks. In fact, he sounds like somebody who's perpetually disappointed. Oh, are you kidding me? And as much as he isn't perfect, I think he could have been a little bit manlier. In fact, I wanted him to be a touch less whiny sounding. And I've talked to Andrea about this a few times, and she's actually changed for the next book the way he sounds, because she understands that it was kind of a less manly kind of way of talk. And I'm happy for that, because that was like the only negative thing in the whole narration. And even that voice wasn't bad. I just don't think it fit the character as well. Wynn was great as the fairy, and the 2 royal cousins clicked. Wife and mother-in-law Duchess were awesome in their portrayal, but even as arch nemesis, I have to stress, the man he wants to kill more than anybody sounded more manly. I just wish they'd traded voices. Still, that's my one conceit. I'm not docking a star or anything like that, simply because she did a great job. She just didn't match my vision of Riker's voice. Parsnow is a true professional, and she handles his tale with utter panache. I can't imagine anybody else reading it, and after talking to her about this, I know we're going to be good. Now, the cover it's weird because I think William Moran changed the cover. I like the original cover. You see, Riker scheming and plotting. Mino and Wynn were there. Mino and Wynn were there as well. But I must laugh because the Audible version cuts the cityscape off in his lap and leaves him with a glowing palm and a rather phallic-looking tower leaping up from his lap. So, maybe it's better that he did change the cover. I think it maybe a little too much trimming took place there. But no points were, subtracted or anything for that either. It's just a funny little, I want to just throw that in because it was, with it being a Rand, it's fitting that you have a phallic symbol in there somewhere. Rand never lets his reader or listener down in this case. His stories manage to grab your attention and then hold it until he finishes. The bad thing is that no matter how long the book lasts, it's never long enough. You just never want the story to end. His characters are captivating and the betrayals really cut deeply. You will root for the Church of Light to light a stick of dynamite, and for the proper queen to remain in place. It's just too bad we don't always get what we want. This, like all of Rand's other works, contains a proper harem, a bevy of beauties that Riker claims as his own, so be prepared for that. Some people get a little offended by this sort of thing, and this is a harem-type book. Also, be prepared to anticipate the next book in the series, because once you've read this book, you're going to be hooked. Thankfully, Rand writes trilogies, and I'm so thankful that there's somebody out there who knows that you don't have to write a series forever and ever and ever. There can be a conclusion, and he does tie this in with his other books. Now, if you know anything about William Rand, you know that each book that he's written since he started ties back into his Selfless Hero trilogy in some way. Now, it is my understanding that this book in particular has the most powerful ties to the original trilogy than any other book in the series thus far, more than, Super Sales on Superheroes, or even his, there's another guy that kind of works in tandem with him who's named Randy Darren, and Fostering Faust and Wild Waste both tie into that series as well. And here, this one, although it's not obvious, because I'll be frank with you, I didn't see it. I still don't know what I missed. So I have to go back and maybe re-listen now that I know. This has got more to do with that other story than any of his other books out thus far. So look, I really enjoyed this book a lot. Rand is amazeballs as a writer, and pure Parsnow narration is fantastic. There is simply no way you're going to be disappointed if you get this book. Read it now and become a Rand fan for life. And I suppose you'll be a Parsnow fan as well. Just jump in the water while the water is cool and fun. Why waste your time reading or listening to other boring books when you can win with this one? This is a real score. Honestly, I'd give it 8.25 stars just because of how fascinating it is and the way the storyline plays out. It's not something you anticipate happening, and that's one of the other things I really like about Rand. For example, in his Super Sales 2 book, I really thought the plot was going to go one way, like he was going to have Felix make a run as the governor, and he was going to get the seat and do a lot of things. And he totally played out like that was what was going to happen. And then the book shifted completely in its tone and what was going on. And it threw me. And he does that with every book he does. I mean, there's no guarantee that this is going to happen or that is going to happen. Okay. So I'm always happy to get a book from Rand. This is an 8.25. I cannot wait for the next book in the series. It is fantastic so far. Thank you. Okay. Up next, surprisingly, we have a non-fantasy book. It is called The Laboratory, or The Laboratory, however you want to pronounce it, which is a futuristic dungeon core by Skylar Grant, narrated by Gabriela Cavallero, and it is 5 hours and 45 minutes.
I heard the voice before I was aware of anything else. Female, young, perhaps in her early 20s if I was any judge of human voices. I wasn't. I should probably try to move around. Arms? No. Legs? No. Head? No. Well, this was awkward. I didn't seem to have a body. Perhaps moving around wasn't a particularly sound strategy. I've got you now. That was a second voice, I think. Male, rough, and in their 30s. I really seemed to know rather a lot about voices, despite not being at all certain I'd ever heard one before. If moving around wasn't working, perhaps I should do some thinking about who I was. Yes, that seemed sensible. I was Emma. That was quite a name. Looked like it was probably an acronym of some sort, but I couldn't remember what. I couldn't seem to remember much.
I've really been wanting to try to get to some of Skylar Grant's stuff for a while now, but for some reason, I always keep holding off with other books taking priority in my queue. And I'm really sad that I don't have an opportunity to get to this book earlier. I mean, I did not get a chance. I really love the dungeon subgenre, as you can tell by me doing this special. And honestly, I only listened to this because I wanted to review a few different dungeon stories so that I can compare and contrast. Because Grant has a few other books out there that I really want to put my ears to, such as his Shard series and Glitch Hunter, but this was just calling out to me right now, and I want to get to those other books eventually as well. But for right now, today, we're going to focus on the laboratory. Now, what is really great about this story is that it's not set in a fantasy world. It's a post-cataclysmic event tale in which reality itself is slowly changing. The tale rockets to a start with a reawakened computer core coming online just as the girl who rebooted her, or it, however you want to look at it, is about to be raped. Once that event is dealt with, the core and the woman who wants to rule the world decides to join forces in order to see their wishes come to fruition. One of the best things about the story is that the computer core, Emma, is not a likable character. This kind of flies in the face of the other dungeon stories, because Cal from the Divine Dungeon, Riker, even Edward from Dungeon Lord, well, Riker was from Dungeon Deposed. I just want to put that out there. They all seem like they're honorable and likable people, even though, Riker has his issues with revenge. Otherwise, he's a pretty cool cat. Emma, not so much. She's rude, she's crass, and seems to do what is best for herself for the most part. This sets her apart from the other dungeon core types. Furthermore, her human companion is really just as single-minded about getting what she wants, and she's just as power hungry. I mean, they're like Pinky and the Brain. What are we going to do tonight, Pinky? The same thing we do every night. We'll try to take over the world. And that's it. I mean, that's the only thing that these two want to do. Emma wants to take over because if she does that, then she can just focus on her scientific studies. And her companion, she wants to do it because she just, she feels like she needs to. Okay? And that really sets her apart from the dungeon core types. So essentially you have two characters who are not nice, who are not sympathetic, and that can be kind of hard on a reader. And I will admit that the book itself really doesn't have much character growth, although there are some scenes or points where Emma starts to question her relationship with her human partner. The book is really just one encounter after another with a boss fight at the end. There were points where it just felt like events happened because something needed to happen, and the oddest was the way in which all of these core users just sort of fell into Emma's scope right when she needed them to. She needed subjects, and lo, did many appear. Now, one thing that sort of fell flat for me was the narration. For the most part, Cavallero did a good job, but when she was not doing a voice for one of the human characters, she was very monotone. And I don't know if this was in order to reflect that it was from the machine's perspective, or if it was just her style of speaking, because she did not pace the story like, say, Andrea Parsnow or Lori Catherine Winklewood. They would have given it, a bit more skip in the step, and it would have gone along a little quicker. I mean, it was a direct and matter-of-fact reading, in my opinion, and I feel like she could have slipped in some emotion. I mean, hell, even Data and Spock had inflections when they spoke, and, they were pretty much emotionless. I mean, I know Spock was half human, but when he spoke, it was just very, very monotone. Otherwise, it wasn't monotone. He had inflection in it. Otherwise, she does a good job. And I'm just picking at nits. But I mean, it was one of those things that kind of stuck out at me. I really wish she'd have kind of just given a bit of emotion to it, because it would have made the reading a bit more powerful, I think. One of the best parts about the book is the setting. It is mysterious, it is foreboding, and it's not an underground lair in the middle of a magical forest. I really appreciate the change in scenery, so to speak. Now, not all dungeons need to be magical, and Grant proves that here. In spite of the story issues, such as some flat characters and we need a fight scene moment here, I kind of enjoyed the book. I wanted to see more of the Core's world and find out just what happened to have broken the world. I have to be honest, in spite of some flaws, I liked the book. I think the series would probably get better as it goes forward. So I'm going to give it a 7.5 stars. It's a fair start for a good series. It's well written in some spots, but there were some issues. Like I say, the narration was just kind of lacking a little, and it just felt like there was just one scene after another with core holders that she needed to get to study for no reason other than them just deciding to show up outside of her door, which was just really weird. So for that reason, it's 7.5 stars, but I can see there's going to be a lot of improvement in the future, and it's going to be nothing but, up the ladder kind of momentum. I hope you guys enjoyed this book. Well, gang, I hope you've enjoyed this Dungeons special. I know I have. It's one of those things I like to do for you all since you've been so good to me and so kind. I would like to say thank you for everybody. If there's any other specials you would like to see us do here, I've got one coming up soon called Is It Almost Lit RPG or Is It Not? And then I've got a few others I'm playing with the ideas of. So if you've got a suggestion for a special, I'm up for it. Give me an idea, and I might be able to do something for you. So that's our show for the afternoon, or the evening, or the morning, wherever you're at. I hope you've enjoyed this. One last thing before we go, we need to check on our dungeon. Okay, so dungeon, bring it up. I love these spirits. They are so awesome. Okay, so we planted the dungeon earlier. Now, time has passed. I mean, I'm in a dungeon, and it's not the same as in the outside world. So the growth pattern here is a little quicker. We've energized this with mana. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit quicker growing than it would be in the wild, just so you're aware. But when you've planted your seed, and you've infused it with enough mana, it will begin to bud. Now this is where you want to grab it and take it, and then you can put it anywhere you want and let it grow in the wild as a free-range dungeon later on. Okay? So, this is just beautiful. It has really come along. This looks like it's going to be a great necrotic dungeon. I mean, hold on. Okay. And here is what it looks like. You can see it's bone white and ready to go. This will make a great dungeon for adventurers to get killed in. Yep. So if you want more home growing tips for dungeons or other things, let me know, and maybe I'll find the recipe for that as well. But anyway, thank you. And I hope you've enjoyed everything. Take care. And remember, the dungeon is always accepting of your presence.